was a fraternity prank. Also, the Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's the new Pope on a rope. That's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bill Roach, and this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today, we're going to deal with just this very special topic. And we've discussed part of it before, but I want to go into a little bit more in depth. Namely, we're going to discuss critical adoption theory. And I know that a lot of people have been inundated with critical race theory in just a variety of areas of their life, but I think the one that people are starting to forget about is the way that critical race theory has worked its way into other organizations. We've seen how it's worked in education and in politics and in business, and the way that you try to buy stocks and bonds, and the way that you have to proverbially display yourself out in society, namely write proper speech. But what if I were to tell you that this is actually starting to work its way into adoption agencies, in particular, Christian adoption agencies? Now, one of the things that we've discussed here in the past is that my wife and I, we sought out to adopt. You know, we didn't want to go through a secular organization because we knew a lot of the things that they were going to try to inundate us with. We understand the ideologies that were there. But what was shocking to us is that we chose a Christian adoption agency just to find that they're doing literally the exact same things. And we were going through all of the different home studies, and we were going through all of the different trainings just to be flooded at the time that we showed up for the in-person sort of, classes that we had to take with nothing less than card-carrying critical race theory. And when you look at it, it's actually critical race theory as applied to critical adoption theory. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to raise this level of critical consciousness within the lives of people so that they can see the pseudo-reality, the reality that they're making up, the reality that they're trying to present you. And how they do it is that they find a few problematized issues. So there are real legitimate issues that people can have with race. Like, yes, there are things that are wrong that are out there, and nobody can deny that. But it's the solution to those problems that are so troubling for us who are trying to engage these different topics. So what happened was we went in there and we listened to all of these. And I remember just distinctly sitting there listening to it. And the first guy starts out and he goes, "Here's what I want all of you to know. You ready? You have unconscious racial bias." And everybody started looking up, asking themselves, what in the world is going on here? And I immediately knew what was going on. I was like, oh, here we go. Like, it was supposed to be a whole lesson on, adoptive parents, but it was an entire hour-long lecture from a PCA pastor here in North Carolina on all of the racial trauma and the issues of transracial adoption and all the endless stories. And we heard multiple hours of this that went on. I mean, if you don't know how to do the hair of the black girl that you adopt, you're doing it because you have, racial prejudice and bias, and you don't understand. I mean, you know how this works. So what I want to do today is I want to just share a little bit more about this. I want to go just a little bit further in depth on what this is so that we can respond to it. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to start out by saying that we actually shared our story and a little bit of the Google review. And I'm not going to put the Google review up here because this is setting the stage for why this is going to be important. I said, we were treated very poorly by this organization. We spent nearly 2 years with them just to be removed the day we got our home study and on the cusp of becoming a waiting family. For those of you who don't know, that's a long process. That's a lot of financial things, a lot of paperwork. You meet with these people forever on all the details of it. And I go on to say, we followed the advice of our caseworker just to be removed for following her advice that seemed to be out of step with the top leadership, i.e., indicates poor communication, dishonesty, and a very indirect approach to the whole process. So think about what's going on here is that eventually we were removed saying, oh, we don't think that we can best serve you. That's just woke doublespeak. I knew exactly what they were doing because of the context of which we had these conversations. Now, notice this. I said, we were told to start our photos and prep our nursery. We had it all decorated, and we're a few weeks away from being a waiting family. So we're literally on the cusp of this. So when we were removed, the tactics of the organization left us with nowhere to turn, and this decorated room to serve as a constant reminder. So I go on to say this. Moreover, the struggle session we endured, which is a common tactic from some of the ideologies driving the organization in order to force us to meet their expectations, were not only unethical, but unbiblical. In addition, this agency is deeply entrenched in woke ideology, following the well-known DEI and CRT tactics. The in-person trainings were filled with this false understanding, heretical, which it is, it's a religion, of society and human nature. The Bible and sound reason do not agree with their approach and required indoctrination classes. No person claiming to follow Christ should follow this false teaching, i.e. race Marxism. I would highly encourage you to look for another organization. Now, one of the things that I do with this, and one of the reasons that I bring this up, is because a lot of the issues that we ran into started asking things like this in our home study. And I started getting a little bit, because it's my radar's up on it. How many people do you have of different racial diverse organizations within the cul-de-sac in which you live? Okay, so you lay it out. How many people within the church? And you lay it out. And the whole point is that they were really just fishing to see how diverse the network in which you lived was. So then when you show up at these trainings and you're hearing all the things that I was telling you about, I wrote a very critical review of it. And one of the issues that they were trying to do is that if you participated in it, and if you were going to have a transracial adoption, you had to go through even more of this sort of training for an even longer period of time. So what I said is, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to go through those trainings. I'm not going to sit through your struggle sessions. I'm not going to sit through DEI training. And so what happened is they came back to us and they said, well, we think that your choices here that you're making and the selections you're making, they're just too narrow here. And we just don't know if we're going to be able to work with you. And the reason that they were doing this was, we sit down, let's have a meeting. There were 3 people sitting in on this meeting, and they were just peppering us with questions. And the nature of the meeting was, sir, you don't understand. Sir, you are unaware. And I knew exactly what they're doing, to the point where the conversation came, no, I know what I'm talking about. I know what I see. I understand these different kinds of manipulations, and they're not going to work on me. The famous sort of poem or line that came from James Lindsay, I know what I'm talking about. I know what I see. I know this manipulation. It doesn't work on me. And they wanted us to go back and completely revamp and reconsider all of these. And I wasn't going to do it. I'm not going to play their double speak, and I'm not going to use sort of utilitarian means. Well, just get through it, because it wasn't just get through the training sessions. You had to have a relationship with this organization all the way until the kid is 18 years old. So this wasn't just, another couple of months, suck it up, kid, and deal with it. No, this was an 18-year process that was virtually never going to end. That said, I want to read one other little thing, because, news got out about some of it, and they started wanting to talk about different people and different individuals related to it. And they started getting some negative reviews on their website. And I thought, this is interesting. We're not the only ones. Well, they also had positive reviews that tried to push back against some of the things that we were claiming. And this one woman, which we're going to say her name because we're going to talk about her later, her name is Brittany Salmon. She says, we have loved this adoption agency and their great care for our family and our children's birth families. They've done a great job in training families to be, in capital, fully prepared for adoption. And then she explains that transracial adoption, trauma, etc., with a biblical perspective. So grateful to work with such an ethical agency that puts the needs of children first. That's not always popular these days. Highly recommended. So with it, what's interesting is that if you go and do a little bit of research on this idea of fully prepared. So if you don't go through these classes, you're not prepared to raise a child. You don't understand the trauma that these children are facing. Namely, you don't actually know how to raise an individual that's transracial from you. And I want us to really consider some of the implications of what goes on here. Let me pull this just a little different here. So one of the things that you got to see is that from talking with other individuals, if you are just, say, a white family, you got to go through all of these different trainings. But if you are, say, a transracial family, you don't have to go through those trainings unless you elect to or something along those lines. And this is something that's pervasive throughout numerous adoption agencies. And the reasons for it are really just the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts, and as they're functioning into critical race theory. And what you have to see from it is that wokeness is really just a neo-Marxist conspiracy theory. And what it is you have this notion where you had the bourgeois and the proletariat, and you have the class struggles between them. And what you have to do is awaken a class consciousness. And the end goal is revolution, to do away with the different classes, to bring in the Marxist utopia and so forth. But the issue is that these things never really worked in the West. So you have, Horkheimer, and you have Marcuse, and you have the Frankfurt School bringing these ideas into sort of the Western context. And just think about what they've done. They've traded out fiscal capital for social capital. And James Lindsay lays this out in his book titled Race Marxism, where he goes to show that now the real capital that you have, the real sort of privilege that you have, could be something like race privilege or gender privilege, and you're oppressed if you don't hold those things. So that could be if you're a minority or you're a woman, but it also works its way out a whole host of other things. If you have a normal, stabilized understanding of reality, you are considered privileged because you were able to bring that about into society. Whereas if you don't, you could be sort of queer, and the queering of society is to sort of make these blurring distinctions. The whole point of it is that each one tries to make two different separate classes that you have to completely undo. And you want this great reversal that's going to take place. But what's going on is that the mechanism that they're using for this is this whole mechanism of reversal, or the utopia, is revolution. So when you're asking people to participate in DEI trainings, what you're really asking them to do is to buy into critical consciousness. So just very briefly, what is diversity? Diversity are people trained in the ideology of critical race theory. And they're going to say things like, we're only going to hire people who are trained in this theory. We can only allow people who are trained in this form, this theory, this ideology that we're bringing about that's come from the different Marxist schools coming out of Germany and Frankfurt and so forth. They're the only ones with authentic critical voices. They're the people who actually see reality, understand reality, and so forth. Now, what is inclusion? Well, inclusion sounds really good. It sounds like, we're going to include all people. Everybody's going to have a place at the table. Everybody's going to have their opportunity to speak and so forth. But what it really ends up being is a way of saying we're only going to include those people who are trained in, quote, critical consciousness. So critical consciousness is what's required to get into the club. But if you don't actually buy into it, they're going to exclude you through the whole notion of inclusion. And equity is this notion of the redistribution or the replications. It's this idea of we want to have equality, but it's really equality of outcome. And that's where the socialist Marxism comes about. And people say, well, it's not socialist, it's not Marxist. It's not doing it in the traditional capitalist and workers' classes concept off of it. It's doing it through social capital, through power and authorities that come through it. And that's precisely the area that we find ourselves in. So let's quickly apply this. I know this is a lot of information. We're going to see this played out, is that you're going to have people who are going to say things like this. So we only want people to adopt our children who have been trained in the ideology of CRT. And these are the only people that we're going to allow into our organizations and keep in our organizations, because they're the only ones who can speak with an authentic voice and have the authentic understanding of trauma or racial disparities and all the rest. And, we want to be an inclusive organization, but we're not going to be inclusive of those who don't embrace critical consciousness. So it starts off as this, we want to have this inclusive environment, but yet we find these problematized issues in society. You're going to find people who have been wrongly mistreated by the police, or you're going to have people that have had real racial issues with adoptive families, or whatever the problems may be. So you're going to have some kind of unity concept, but you're going to find real problems in society, historical problems, contemporary problems, whatever. And they're going to say, we need to have unity. We need to have progress. We need to have a future of this going forward. So how do you do it? So you have this unity problem coming back into further unities and all the rest. Well, you get the unity by solving the problem in the way that we think that you should solve the problem. And you go, well, what in the world is that? Well, the answer to that is critical consciousness. CRT, diversity, equity, inclusion. So what happens is it starts out as this massive bait and switch in which the only way you can solve the problem is sort of through this linguistic manipulation, through this neo-Marxist conspiracy theory, through this pseudo-reality known as, critical race theory, and so on and so on and so forth. Namely, they want you to be an anti-racist. And you're like, well, is that specifically what they want? Is it anti-racism is the call that they're wanting us to do? And that said, I want to transition into one video for it to explain what is anti-racism. And then I want to walk through a little bit of the trainings that we were asked to go through. Namely, like we've got this big book. Let me pull this up here. We've got this big old binder here that you can see. And this big old binder has all these different tabs on it. And literally tab 1, the first thing that you look at here is this whole issue of transracial adoption. So clearly it takes very precedent, priority in what they're trying to do. So let's pull this up here, and then we're going to explain why this is a kind of a big deal. So evaluation, the king himself, James Lindsay. Let me pull this one more time. So what you're going to find here is James Lindsay is going to explain what is anti-racism. Namely, like, okay, you have critical race theory, you have diversity, equity, inclusion, you have all of these concepts, but what does it actually look like? Like, what might it look like in an organization, like an adoption agency and so forth? So with no further ado, take a listen.
Anti-racist, that's being against racism, right? Well, not in the movement of critical social justice, it's not. So my name is James Lindsay. I run a website called New Discourses, and on New Discourses I'm writing an encyclopedia of social justice terminology to tell you why they misuse these words so that they can manipulate you. It's called Translations from the Wokish. So let's break down anti-racism. It's obvious that the idea of anti-racism is being against racism. That's how they get you. But the concept is more specific for them. In fact, it's described explicitly in the critical race theory literature. Anti-racism is as a lifelong commitment to an ongoing process of self-reflection, self-critique, and social activism, and no one is ever done. That's probably a little bit more than you thought you were signing up for when you said, well, I'll be an anti-racist. I want to be against racism. Specifically, you can't just do any kind of self-reflection or self-critique in this lifelong ongoing process. You can't do any kind of social activism. You have to actually become a critical race theorist. You're either a critical race theorist, thus anti-racist, or you're a racist. There is no neutral. That's something else they say about this. So in other words, you have to sign up for a lifelong commitment to being a critical race theorist and to doing the work, what they call critical race praxis, of waking up other people to a so-called racial consciousness, so that they'll be critical race theorists too. That's what you have to do for the rest of your life to qualify as an anti-racist under the social justice ideology. If you want to learn more about critical social justice and how it uses terms to manipulate people, visit newdiscourses.com and check out the social justice encyclopedia called Translations from the Wokish.
So what I want you to see here is very briefly, like we were talking about, what James is trying to get at is that they're trying to awake this issue of critical consciousness. But notice it's not just the awakening of critical consciousness. They want you to actually put this into praxis or into practice. Now, we always talk about theory. And I think what you have to understand is that there's two different working definitions of theory. I mean, we might come up with more, but for as this, a lot of people think critical race theory is just this abstract theory in the sense of like Einstein's theory of general relativity. But I want you to have a fundamental shift in your understanding of what theory means for these particular figures. So think of it like this. What if I were to say, we have a theory for how we're actually going to like win this, say, jiu-jitsu match or this basketball game or something like that. And the point is that in order for it to work, you have to have both the intellectual concept and the practical aspect of it. So I can't just give you like, here are the 5 steps that you're going to have to take in order to win the basketball game. You actually have to go out there and do the practice of winning the basketball game by fulfilling these particular tasks. So a lot of people think that theories like Einstein's theory of general relativity, it's abstract, when the reality is that there's this great union between the intellectual sort of high theory of it and the praxis of it. And what you have to see is that sort of like the smoke and fire kind of incident, like, whenever you have smoke, you truly have fire. Well, whenever you have critical race praxis, you have critical race theory. So when you have people saying you need to do these anti-racism works and you have to speak up against whiteness and you have to think about the trauma and you have to do this anti-racist work, you know that they're completely, utterly inundated with critical race theory, even if they tell you that they're not inundated with it. And part of it is that's the manipulation. You know, we have it, we don't have it, the action, the reaction. And the whole point of it is they get you caught up in these dialogues when they're just really just ramming this through all of the different organizations. And this is what's going on in adoption agencies. You have to go through this lifelong process of critical reflection, doing anti-racism work in order to actually adopt children. You may say, this is absurd. This does not ever happen. Well, what I want you to do is I want you to look at a few things here. Let's come back to our evaluation scene. And I want us to look at this. So first of all, and I want to make sure all of you can see these. So there's this website that came out here. And sorry, OBS requires me to adjust accordingly in different ways. And we will do this a few times just because it needs to be done. So one of the things that they talk about, let's look at this. Forgive me here, my friends, is that it talks about this idea that the government is uprooting children from loving homes because of woke views on race. And it goes on to explain this whole article that, you know, it talks about here in North Carolina. It says a mother with a significant history of child maltreatment. It says within a few days, he was placed by the Department of Social Services with a veteran foster parent, it goes on to name them, as required under federal law. The department created a case plan for the True's mother to reunify with her son, but she did not follow the plan and starting when he was 6 months old, she failed to visit the baby or contact the department for a period of 13 consecutive months beyond the state's official definition of abandonment. After 25 months of unsuccessful reunification efforts far beyond federal guidelines, the department and the child's guardian ad litem recommended that the case plan be changed to adoption. So they went on to change this, and it goes on to say things like this. They placed him in a foster home with someone who had never met or had no plans to adopt him. What would possess an agency to display such reckless disregard for a toddler's attachment to his family? The whole point is it goes on to say, according to a complaint filed last month with the official civil rights at the Department of Health and Human Services, Guilford County is removing, quote, African-American children from white foster potential adoptive families based on reasons evidence indicates were related to race. The complaints assert that these removals are illegal under a Multi-Ethnic Placement Act. As amended in 1996, which prohibits discrimination in foster care and adoption on the basis of race and nationality. That law, along with the 1997 Adoption and Safe Families Act, sought to ensure that adoption was pursued as the best alternative for children when reunification was not viable. Changes of cultural ineptitude provided a pretext for moving children from parents whom the department had found suitable for years. Prior to the hearing, Mrs. Rhodes, who was a licensed cosmetologist serving clients of various races, was criticized as insensitive for requesting to cut True's hair. The department at one point even sent a worker who also conveniently sells black hair products to instruct her in the proper care of black hair. During the hearing, where the department recommended True be removed, Ginger Rhodes' care of True's hair was brought up as a reason not to let the family adopt. In addition, the caseworker accused the family of giving True an uppity nickname of Truman. Finally, the caseworker testified that the True should be in a home with people who understand his plight as a black male in America. In short, what you're finding is this is a clear example of people using these sometimes fake issues, but they're only issues if you interpret them through critical race theory and critical consciousness in order to remove somebody who is in a well-off home, a good home, a home that was providing for the child for these nebulous reasons. Like, oh, you don't do his hair right. You don't give him the right nickname, or you don't understand his personal plight, and so on and so forth. And what goes on to say is that this person has now been put into foster care for more than 3 years now with no hope of being reunified or adopted in sight. Where the Rhodes case is rare or routine practice is difficult to discern from federal data, where the justification for moving a child to a new placement is not described. What is clear, however, is that black children exit to permanency, especially adoption at lower rates and more slowly than white and Hispanic children. And it goes on to just explain just the reality of what's going on with this. This is a normal case. This is something that's going on in regular detail. And these are the exact things that we were warning about. These adoption agencies are doing the exact same thing. The only difference is that organizations like this one here that's going on in North Carolina are doing it after the child has been placed for some kind of foster to adopt or some kind of concept like that, and they're removing the child. Whereas the particular organization we were with, they won't even place the child. So the point is that just like in the old sort of Maoist, Marxist game plans, if you don't speak the proper language, if you're not in the proper red guard versus black guard, which were the categories, the red guard were the people who are doing the things that Mao wanted them to do, the way that you speak, the way that you act, the way that you respond to different things. And those in the black guard were the people who were disregarded. You're not saying the proper words, you're not doing the proper things, so on and so forth. And you had terrible social implications that could take place if you were in the black guard versus the red guard. Well, in this sense, if you're not saying exactly what they want you to say, the way that they want you to say it, doing the things that they want you to do, the way that they want you to do them and so forth, you somehow have less social capital that you can bring to this entire situation. Or in our case, the situation is very clear. If you don't do critical race praxis, if you're not an anti-racist, if you're not an advocate for your child, and let me tell you what advocacy for the child meant in our situation that we were there. So they had the mom of the PCA pastor who was there, and she was talking about, oh, our kids were in the foyer one day of the church and somebody picked up my child and they were playing with them as they were doing with the other children, but they were tokenizing him. And because they were tokenizing him, I had to be my child's greatest advocate. And I get you don't want people to, do something that's wrong to your child and so forth. But how in the world is she coming to that conclusion? So you have Unity problematized. So she has some problem with this, some social situation that she thinks isn't right. And the only solution is for her to interpret it through the lens of critical theory and solve it through the paradigms of critical theory. And this was like a case example of her of unconscious racial bias and so forth. Or it could just be something as simple as this. There's a group of kids that were there. You had the smallest child and they were playing with him by picking him up and having fun and so forth. Not everything has to be viewed through a racialist lens, but with critical race theory, guess what? Everything is racist. Not just, it could be racist. No, everything is ontologically racist. Everything that you see has to be interpreted in some way, shape, or form. You got to go find the racism in it because everything is inherently racist. Just think about the implications of this. So then you ask yourself this question, well, I don't see the racism, so how do I know that it's racist? They're going to explain that to you. Somebody trained in diversity will be able to see the racism, and those who come from those underprivileged groups, they have just special access to this reality of racism to explain the situation to you in so many better ways. You see how this works? It's what's known as standpoint epistemology. You have these different people from their particular points and places. They can see reality or what is a deeper understanding of reality in ways that you cannot and do not see. So when you say, well, I don't see it, they're going to say, oh, don't you see how this works? Don't you see how this is operating? And let me inform you. So the point is, you're still not going to be able to see it. You just have to blindly trust the person on whatever may be projected on that particular situation, and your reactions have to be given in that particular situation. So let me give you an example of this. This comes from James Lindsay also, where he talks about the concept of grayscale. And let's just say you're a white man. You're only going to see reality, say, in gray. You're not going to see the other colors. But let's just say you're a white woman. Well, you may see, we'll just pick some colors, gray and pink, your intersectionality points of having some kind of element of oppression given to you because women are oppressed within this concept. You can see pink. Well, what if you're not only a woman, but you're a black woman? So now you can see gray, pink, and we'll just say yellow with it. And your job is to inform the white woman, inform her of the yellow things in society and the white man of both the yellow and the pink, just like the woman was giving those colors. And we could go on and on and on. So let's come up with we could say you are a queer, transracial, Muslim, fill in the blank. You have all the different intersectionality points, and you can see an even greater understanding of colors, and it's your job to inform people of them. So what is critical consciousness in this sense? What is diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings? It's informing people of racism because of your extra perceived understandings of reality. You see all the colors that are out there in order to awaken them to critical consciousness and to provide critical consciousness explanations for situations and answers to different issues that are arising out there. So the whole point of it is that when we talk about diversity, people trained in critical consciousness, people who see these things, this is specifically what's going on here. This is why, seeing the hair as something is different. Well, you don't see the racism within it. You're not giving them a true and proper haircut according to it. And that's what's interesting is that was even a huge topic at our trainings. This girl was going on and on and on about how she was in some transracial family and they didn't understand how to do her hair, or they didn't understand how many times you should wash the hair, comb the hair, do all this kind of stuff, and then just immediately interpret it as unconscious racial bias. And we can go on and on and on about it. Now, here's what's interesting is I want to pull this up in a little different way, and I want us to see why it was important that I read the initial thing from the woman, Brittany Salmon, who was responding there. And what I want to do is I want to pull this up, and we're probably going to have to adjust it here. She actually is a person who has written this book. And let me see if you can see that on your thing. So bam, technology in action, my friends. So she is a woman who has written this book titled It Takes More Than Love. And if you were to go and look at what she says here, and I'm just going to read it for you. It says, "This beauty is on sale for $7.50 at Amazon today. It takes more than love. Quote, a Christian guide to navigating the complexities of cross-cultural adoption." So clearly what they did is they went out and found this woman who's adopted through them, and they have her book here on cross-cultural adoption, which if you go and look at it, which we can actually just pull it up here, and we can look at some of the things that are given here. Read sample. All the different people that have endorsed it, so on and so forth. And you look at a few of the things that are in this book, if we could ever get to it. Welcome to the journey, race conscious parenting. And then she tells a story, more than hair care. You see what's going on here? Offering our presence in the hard, namely dealing with what they consider racial trauma situations. Representation, more than love. What makes all the difference? Adoption, it's not about you. Adoption voices and so on and so forth. And then responding to, the power of words. And we're going to go into more of this. And you might be thinking, what's the big deal on this? This woman is giving a clear-cut case of critical adoption theory. There's no other way to put it. Like, this is a book on critical adoption theory, which is critical race theory, which is critical consciousness, which is race Marxism. So, you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Well, one, they clearly used her because she speaks with authority on these matters. We don't know what we're talking about, even though I do know what I'm talking about. I teach a graduate level course on this. I'm good friends with many of the major figures on this. I've been speaking out on this for years, read tons of the original literature, but I don't speak from the right privileged status on this. So let's just go a little bit further. So here's another thing that's interesting about Brittany. Had to do a little research. First of all, she's a graduate of Southeastern Seminary. She did her EDD in this whole issue. I think she wrote her dissertation on something related to minority representation within children's books. So clearly she's going through all these books and just being a strong advocate for critical race theory and critical consciousness within books and so forth. But if you look at it, notice what this quote says when you look at it here. Let's pull this up just a wee bit, because she's got a bunch of little comments under there. And let's make it just a little bigger so you can see it. Notice what she says. I am so thankful for this opportunity to serve and learn alongside this amazing crew. So many pastors and leaders that I respect. Also, I'm not going to lie. When I got the email invite, I may or may not have thought someone was pranking me. And you're like, well, what is she being pranked about? she came on as leadership with the ERLC during, if you look at the date of this, January 24th, 2018, at the height of their critical theory, they hire this woman. We're talking, these are the height of the MLK 50 conferences. This is the height of Russell Moore talking about all of his traumatic situations and critical consciousness. And we're all familiar with this and so much of what she's pushing. So not only is she the author of a book advocating for critical adoption theory, she's also a person that worked with the ERLC who pushed this agenda at the highest levels of the Southern Baptist Convention. And if you ironically look at this, this is also during the same time period of which we got Resolution 9. Remember Resolution 9, where critical race theory is an analytical tool for understanding society and all these different things. When the reality is, it wasn't just a tool of understanding reality. It was a tool in order to officially adopt the mechanisms and the practical, we'll say, it's a way of actually getting people within the Southern Baptist Convention to put a stamp of approval so that they can teach this stuff within their institutions. It's like changing the HR books so that it can be an analytical tool for changing our hermeneutics in our Old Testament and our New Testament, our systematic theologies, and the way that we run our denominational leadership and so on and so forth. And she was a person who was working with the ERLC during this whole time period. And it's funny because now you're starting to see Southern Baptist sort of children's homes buying into critical race theory and Southern Baptist partnered adoption agencies requiring critical race theory to be taught within their organizations. And you think to yourself, you're like, so I thought it was just an analytical tool, when the real issue is that it's removing me and my wife from being able to adopt from agencies because we don't buy into your analytical tool. It was never an analytical tool. It was really a means of excluding those who aren't going to buy into your unification process of critical theory, namely critical consciousness. Remember, we want to have unity. We want every tribe, tongue, and nation represented here on the face of this. Oh, but we got these problems. And then their solution to them is always more critical theory, critical consciousness. Do what we want you to do. Buy into things that we want you to buy into. Say the right words. Do the right things, and so on and so forth. And my point of it is that, yeah, guys, like, I really want to say thank you, Walter. Thank you, Keith Whitfield. Thank you, Southern Baptist Convention. Thank you, Resolution 9. Why? Because what happened? You guys put this through and you're removing people like me and my wife who don't buy into critical theory, therefore we don't buy into critical adoption theory, from being able to adopt from the adoption agency that's officially partnered with the denomination where I have 2 degrees and my ordination. Thank you. And you wonder why I spoke out about this and why I continue to speak out about this. It's because it's ripping families apart. No ifs, ands, or buts. And you should be ashamed of yourselves. And I think you're going to face judgment. I think God will judge you guys for the way that you've handled this, and you rightly deserve it. That's why people have always asked, Bill, what should we do with this? Should we have some middle ground? No, there is no middle ground. There's no middle ground with a cultic religion that is promulgating this kind of stuff. We literally need to see critical theory for all that it is and all that it's worth and throw every bit of it out. There's no analytical tool here. There's no tool of construction. It's pure destruction. And this is exactly what it's brought about. And you might be saying, well, she's not that bad, my friend. Oh, really? Let's go here. Let's look a little bit more here. June 2nd of 2020. What things might she have been saying? Let's just go through here. Let me adjust these again because adjustments make things a little clearer for us. So she goes on to say, sorry, I made that just a little big. That's not what she said. That's what I said. She goes on to say this. Hey, white pastors, if you've been silent on racism, if addressing this issue hasn't been in your church's DNA, your very first step in racial reconciliation is repentance, both private and public. She goes on to say this. The inequality, namely the inequity in this sense, the issue of redistribution or whatever they want it to be, the disparities that have to be interpreted, the inequality in our congregations and the systems in our communities have been around for a long time. This isn't a new issue. And although we are so glad you're finally here, you are late, very late. You must come to grips with the truth that you haven't equipped the people you shepherd to be reconcilers, and that you've left Black families, interracial families, and white allies alone in this. And they feel that. We feel it deeply. Your next step in repentance is to learn and listen to the voices who have been speaking out for some time. Namely, you need to shut up. You need to, quote, be a good oppressor and just listen to the people speak their experiences to you that are always interpreted through critical consciousness and critical theory. It goes on to say, it's not time to center your voice, although your voice is important and critical in church leadership. But now it is time to model humble repentance, namely, shut up and listen. Listen and do exactly what we want you to do. She concludes with this. And if you/your church has yet to say anything about this issue, make no mistake, regardless of how bad you feel about what's going on, history has already judged you. You are the white moderate Dr. King bemoaned in his letter from a Birmingham jail, and I implore you to repent. And that's the person that they go to, who's trained in critical consciousness, who has no allies here, who understands trauma and everything that you need to see to push back against us. She's a full-blown Marxist critical race theorist, period. I would expect her to say such things. And the fact that the organization used her as their justification for it proves how woke they really are. They do it with the exact same examples. They do it with the people that are advocating for it and so forth. Now, what I want to do is I want to make another transition here, and I want to pull up some of the articles that they asked us to read. So there's this one, and I'm going to, again, like I said, we're going to have to do a little bit of editing here. This is virtually a live show, even though I record it. Notice virtually. Everything virtuals today, right? We're almost there. We've almost got it all in there. There we go. But now I'm going to make the article bigger so we can look at it. So this article here on children being in adoption, we'll just use it like that. It'll fit the best. Titled, Empowering Adopted Children of Color in the Face of Racism and Discrimination. Notice what I want you to see here. So I have this here, and this in section 1, and I'm going to pull this up just so you can see. Section 1, right there. This is our book. Like, this is the book that they gave us for the training. This is the first article right there. So what are some of the things that might be in this article? So it starts out how you have this kid who, it goes on to say here, he was going down and he was wearing a Michael Vick jersey. You remember the pit bull fighting guy? And it says was on a nearby roof. So with this, he was talking about this individual, Hines' description, wearing a Michael Vick jersey, was on a nearby roof stealing things about 10 minutes earlier. Hines was wearing a Vick jersey. And it goes on to say that, you know, they clearly stereotyped him and that the police came and he was saying that he was just out here. And it says, you know, don't you think that it's a little of a coincidence, the officer said. No, Hines replied. A lot of people have Michael Vick jerseys. Thinking the teen was getting smart with him, the officer asked Hines where he lived. I live just down the street. The officer slapped the ball out of Hines' hands, punting it across a field, and drew his weapon. Get on the ground now. In a flash, Hines was face down on the ground, a gun aimed at his back. He lay there, frozen, as the officer called his new suspect into the station. I was scared, he said years later. I didn't know if I twitched or moved, whether I would be shot. I, ... tried to stay as still as humanly possible. 15 minutes later, the officer realized he had the wrong kid. He holstered his weapon and retrieved the basketball for Hines. Now, let's just flat out say this. This was wrong. Nobody's going to deny that this was wrong. Like I've said, if you find real incidents of racism or stereotyping in this sense, I will fight that with you everywhere. Every single time that we see it. If there are real redlining laws that still exist, or if there are real incidents where, you know, civil rights aren't being pushed through our civil rights laws that were passed during the height of civil rights, I will stand with you at every single venture of this. But notice what it goes on to say here. it goes on to give us a little bit more, and I've got a little bit of notes down here. It says, like Simmons, adoptive parents do not share the same race as their children will confront discrimination or racism faced by their children. Child advocates and those who work in adoption say that in order to prepare children to handle racial trauma, adoptive parents must help them develop a strong sense of racial identity. Now, it goes on to say this. What you have to see is that they're going to say you have to give this strong sense of racial identity. And what does this mean? First of all, you have these problematized situations, and you have to develop this by racial identity. But how do you understand this? You got to go through racial identity training, critical consciousness training, in which you are going to fix the situations that could be real wrongs, but it's only fixed through this particular avenue of critical consciousness training. And let's keep going here. I'm trying to just give this. I think once you kind of see the whole thing, it starts to make sense. Now, it goes on to say that Hines, now 27, works with the Maryland agency Adopts Together, where he helps run a support group for parents with adopted children of a different race or culture. So clearly this is your diversity person within the organization. When incidents of discrimination or injustice arise, he counsels parents to respond in the same way that his mother did, by speaking up. Now notice what it's going to mean by speaking up here. They're going to tell you this. He says, use your privilege to make a change. So what are they starting to say here? They're usually trying to say, use your white privilege to make the change. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to speak to power, but yet they're using the power of privilege in this sense. But what I ultimately want you to see from this, in this initial thing, I know this could carry on for a long time, is that they're trying to deal with this situation of real wrongs that could be done, but they're trying to say you have to interpret it through this particular lens, and you can only provide a solution through critical theory. So then it gives, all these different charts that they're going to say here and different things. But what I want you to see here is that it goes on to say this. According to the 2010 census, about a quarter of households with adopted children are transracial. Transracial adoptions occur when adults of one race adopt children of another race. So it's going on, but it goes on to say this. Choosing to adopt a child of a different race should be a very conscious decision, said Janice Goldwater, founder and executive director of Adoptions Together. Parents will need to be intentional about embracing opportunities and challenges that are associated with raising a child of another race. So you need to be very clear about what you're getting into. And what is it going to mean? Like, are there differences? Yes, but the real thing, the thing you need to be very conscious of, me speaking to you, is that if you're going to actually do that, it means you got to adopt critical adoption theory. It's not just you need to be ready to adopt a child that's a different race than you and any problems that may come from it. It means you need to be willing to go through these trainings. I know this is not what they're saying. This is what I'm saying. You need to be willing to go through these trainings, do the things that they want you to do, say the things that they want you to say, be on the right sense of like Mao's red guard versus black guard if you're actually going to adopt. And if you don't, they won't let you. Now it goes on to say this. The first thing adults need to think about is what it will mean to be a conspicuous family, Goldwater said. Am I somebody that wants to walk through the world not being noticed? Because when you are an adopted family, particularly a transracially adopted family, it's all eyes on you all the time. Gosh, that seems like somebody's getting really paranoid. Like, yes, people are going to look at you sometimes if you're a transracial family. But notice what they're trying to do. They're trying to instill one of the things of critical consciousness into you, that there's oppression everywhere at all times. And if people are looking at you, they're looking at you with a racist lens. Sounds very cynical to me, because it is very cynical. And you can say, well, I'm not doing that. But they're going to approach you with, well, we know what you're really doing. You see, sir, you don't actually understand what you're doing. You have unconscious racial bias. And we're here to knock on the door and explain this to you. Don't you see? Don't you understand how this works? And once you have been enlightened to the reality of this, you're going to see, you know what? You do look at people that are transracial in a racist way. You do look at these people as just a different group than you. And we need to do away with this. So we could change all of this and say, you bourgeois people, You look at everybody as proletariat. You don't even know that you have unconscious proletariat tendencies within you. But once you see it, you need to be a good bourgeois and fix the situation. You need to do the praxis of being a good bourgeois. And if you do the praxis of being a good bourgeois, maybe you can be redeemed. Change out bourgeois for white. Be a good white. Do the things that we say a good white should do, buying into critical consciousness and so forth. So they go on to explain what this means. They go on to say the process is self-reflective. She said, what in the world does that mean? Self-reflective. It means you need to, in the terms of modern psychology, understand your unconscious, in the Freudian sense of the term, areas of systemic racism and unconscious bias. And you need to make these things apparent to yourself and fix them in the way that you act in society. He says parents will need to look at the community, the school, the church that they are bringing a child into and decide whether it's a healthy environment that will enable them to grow. Namely, is it going to be an environment that embraces critical race theory? So it goes on to say this. We'll continue going here. We're almost done with this. If they are living in an environment where everyone who is in leadership has power and authority doesn't look like them, where the school curriculum is presenting great minds, great scientists, great inventors, and never represents someone from their backgrounds, that's giving them a message that their community and their people have done nothing of worth, Bryant said. And then Bryant Davis said she believes children need to develop their own positive relationships with people of their own race, see their parents interacting with people of their race as peers, and learn about their legacy and so on and so forth. The point that I want you to see here is that this whole idea of you have to see representation and you have to see from your sort of background creative learning experiences in this sense, or critical reflective theories in this sense. This is the old socio-emotional learning, which is telling you not only this is what you are thinking, but this is how you should think and feel about these particular situations. And this is coming from Paulo Freire, who was a South American education theorist that has worked his way into every avenue of American education systems and European education systems. He was a critical Marxist, just like all of the other critical theorists. And what he did is he took critical theory and he put it in the lens or through the paradigm of educational theory. So when you're looking at this here and you need to, it doesn't look like them or feel like them, you need to see representation. This is social emotional learning. She also goes on to say that she warned about your child being colorblind, namely this idea of, well, I don't see color. That's so wrong. And they're saying that you need to embrace these particularities of people and so forth. And they usually explain it through, and we could look at so many more of these, through racial trauma, microaggressions, which a microaggression is an aggression you have against somebody, whether you know it or not. And it may not be a full-blown aggression, but it's a microaggression. And you go, where in the world do microaggressions come from? Well, it came from somebody who was on an airplane one time who was extremely overweight, and due to the weight distributions on an airplane was asked to move to a different place on the plane, because planes had to be balanced and so forth, and it was labeled as a microaggression against a figure there. That's the origins of some of these terms. They're unconscious racial aggressions that you have towards different people. And one of the issues of being colorblind is you're not taking in the complexity of the wholeness of the person and all of these things. But the interesting thing is that who's probably one of the biggest advocates of a colorblind society? Martin Luther King Jr. And fundamentally, I don't want to, judge somebody by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Well, they definitely want to judge somebody by the color of their skin. And that is going to determine the content of their character. And the content of your character is going to be determined on whether or not you're going to do it also. So they go on to just talk about different things here. And I want you to keep looking at this. It says, if you're a white person and you haven't experienced what your child has experienced, I know how you feel is wrong, Goldwater said. So notice this. If you're a white person, you haven't experienced what your child has experienced. If you don't see reality in the way that your child's lived experience tells them reality must be, There's some deficiency in you. So what do you need to do? They go on to say that Bryant Davis agreed, noting that while a white parent may not be able to feel grief or feel brokenhearted about incidents that cause racial trauma, the difference is that they do not feel vulnerable or targeted. Being able to honestly acknowledge that you, as a parent, cannot understand the incident in the same way while also showing compassion will encourage children and teens to openly discuss these incidents when they do occur, she said. So the point is that she's giving a clear understanding of standpoint epistemology, standpoint theory. You don't see it. You can't see it. You're never going to have that exact lived experience, but you need to talk about it. And I get children need to be able to talk with their parents about different situations that are going on. But this isn't just a matter of talking. This is notice the wordplay that goes on here. Notice the wordplay that takes place. Sorry, I actually didn't pull this up. You can see those right here. The wordplay that's going on is that they're saying, we're merely saying you need to talk about issues of trauma. But what they're actually doing is they're saying you need to fully imbibe your children with critical consciousness to look at every situation in a racist lens. Notice this. This is what the literature is saying. What individuals do with it, that's case by case example. But the point is that you're seeing that if you went out and said you need to train these children to look at every incident as race initiated and trauma from race and critical consciousness and lived experience and all the different things that bring to it. And in light of doing that, you need to take active steps to be an anti-racist. People would immediately speak up and say, that's nuts. We don't want to do that. But if they say you're just merely having a conversation, yeah, a conversation about what? So the point is they're going to go on to say, you need to stand up. Silence is violence. You have to speak up for your child and so on and so forth. You need to educate them and so forth. And again, educate them towards what? If there's real racism, yeah, we should fight it. But it's educate them and educate yourself towards revolution. And then it goes on to say here, in the very end of supporting children through racial trauma, it says she advises parents to read books, articles, and blogs from authors who represent various communities of colors, namely a sociology of knowledge from standpoint theory, consume news sources that have diverse staffs, again, same more kind of thing, more standpoint theory, who can provide various perspectives on current events and seek out diverse friendships with people who will be able to share their experiences with issues of race and who can potentially share their perspectives with the child. In other words, you need to get yourself and your children and your family around a whole bunch of people trained in critical consciousness. You need to surround yourself with these people, listen to what they say, and do what they say to do. Now, the interesting thing is that they go on here and they provide like all these other articles, and I don't want to go through every single one of them, but they provide a lot of articles like to my white parents of my black son, and then it gets into more issues related to color blindness and so forth. But what's interesting is that a lot of their articles come from this adoptivefamilies.com. And what do you see here, like literally on the front page? How to be an anti-racist adoptive parent, how to adopt foster care, open adoptions, all these different things that go on here, motherly children of color or mothering children of color who are becoming adults. Like this whole website that they pulled things from that are in this book, like literally in this book, are anti-racist work. It's critical race theory work. So I want to finish one last time here with what is an anti-racist. And I want to pull this up. Sorry, I didn't pull it up for the first one. My bad. This has been a long day. Bear with me. I could start telling jokes. Heaven forbid that we say. So I just want to pull this up again. Look at this. How to be an anti-racist adoptive parent. Look at that. Look at what it says here. How to be an anti-racist adoptive parent. Number one article on the top of their page here. This is with adoptivefamilies.com. Notice what else it goes on to look at. Mothering children of color who are becoming adults. Critical race theory through and through. So what I want to do is finish out here playing this
anti-racist,
again,
that's
because I want us to be reminded exactly what this is.
So being anti-racist, that's being against racism, right? Well, not in the movement of critical social justice, it's not. So my name is James Lindsay. I run a website called New Discourses, and on New Discourses I'm writing an encyclopedia of social justice terminology to tell you why they misuse these words so that they can manipulate you. It's called Translations from the Wokish. So let's break down anti-racism. It's obvious that the idea of anti-racism is being against racism. That's how they get you. But the concept is more specific for them. In fact, it's described explicitly in the critical race theory literature. Anti-racism is as a lifelong commitment to an ongoing process of self-reflection, self-critique, and social activism, and no one is ever done. That's probably a little bit more than you thought you were signing up for when you said, well, I'll be an anti-racist. I want to be against racism. Specifically, you can't just do any kind of self-reflection or self-critique in this lifelong ongoing process. You can't do any kind of social activism. You have to actually become a critical race theorist. You're either a critical race theorist, thus anti-racist, or you're a racist. There is no neutral. That's something else they say about this. So in other words, you have to sign up for a lifelong commitment to being a critical race theorist and to doing the work, what they call critical race praxis, of waking up other people to a so-called racial consciousness so that they'll be critical race theorists too. That's what you have to do for the rest of your life to qualify as an anti-racist under the social justice ideology. If you want to learn more about critical social justice...
So again, that's what critical adoption theory is seeking to do. And if you want to fight against this, you need to stop funding them, stop going through them, find alternative ways, speak out about what it actually is, and present the manipulations for what they're worth. And I know some people are going to say, well, they do good things. Yeah, but they also do bad things. And we need to speak out against the bad things that they have. Because if not, you're going to be overtaken with the socialism of critical adoption theory, critical race theory, critical queer theory, and all the rest. So I could keep going. But again, thank you. Another episode of Timeless Dialogues.
10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.